For those who don't know, i4Kids Europe, it's a Horizon Europe project that comes from the lack of European focus on pediatric innovation and the fact that innovation is still really focused on adults and that adult devices need to be adapted for the needs of children. It also results in a lot of stress and anxiety for them because it's not adapted to their needs. On top of that, there is a really fragmentation of the ecosystem with emerging countries that have more fragmented innovations than the leaders one. And that's why we created this European Pediatric Innovation Network, i4Kids. And that's what we are doing with the partners that you can see on the screen. And this network is led by Sant Joan de Déu in Barcelona. It enlarges the initial initiatives that they had in Spain. And the goal is really to allow synergy to reduce difference between strong and emerging innovator ecosystem with the goal to strengthen the innovation competitiveness of pediatric in Europe. So currently, we have our big annual event that is coming next month on the 27th of September. It's the Pediatric Innovation Day, and it will take place this year in Riga. And it's a free event, so I really encourage you to join because it will be really interesting to have all the stakeholders of pediatrics together. And here we are today for our Pediatric Innovation Training Capsule with the number 8. They are all recorded, so you can all find online in the link that I will attach at the end of the session. So that being said, let's jump into today's really exciting topic. So some months ago, we had a training capsule more general about regulation. But we wanted to give a focus to medical device regulation because we know that it's a hot topic and it has been identified as a really pain point and barrier for stakeholders in pediatrics. So for this training, we count on our expert, Francisco Rodríguez, which is a scientific and regulatory affairs at ASPHALION. And Francisco, I will leave you the floor to tell us more about this topic.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlotte, for the kind introduction. I will be sharing my screen now. Well, I think that you first need to stop sharing your screen. No, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so please, can you confirm that you can see the presentation on your screen? Yes?
Yes,
okay.
We do.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as Charlotte mentioned, in today's capsule, we will review specifically regulation applicable for medical devices in Europe, in the European Union, and also making a specific focus on those nuances that we need to take into account for the fact that we are developing products intended for a pediatric population, okay, in difference with a product intended for adult population. This is Francisco Rodríguez. I'm part of ASPHALION MedTech, the ASPHALION division on specialized in medical technology, and I will be with you during this capsule training. So first of all, as a really brief introduction, as you know, medical devices in Europe need to bear a specific symbol, which is the CE mark. Okay, so what does this CE mark actually means? So the CE mark is the proof that every intended user has to ensure that the product they are acquired has been reviewed in accordance with the applicable regulatory requirements in accordance with the European legislation. Okay, so whenever we see a product that is bearing a CE mark, we know that this product have successfully reviewed all the requirements that are applicable to them and has been approved by a CE certificate issuing body that in the case of medical devices are called notified bodies. CE mark is not restrictive of medical devices. You may also have already seen this symbol maybe in toys or some electrical equipment of domestic use. So this is applicable actually to every product that have a European legislation. Okay, so the idea of this symbol is that we can freely commercialize this product without any burden in the whole European Economic Area and those associated territories for which we have an agreement. Here you can see in the slide, this area includes the 26 member states, plus Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, and also we have agreements with Croatia and Turkey. For the cases of United Kingdom and Switzerland, we do not have actual agreements, although the CE mark is currently recognized in this territory. So we can say it's easy to do the transition from the European Union to these territories as long as we comply with the European legislation. This is just a figure just to make you aware of how is the situation foreseen for medical devices, medtech industry in general in the coming years. Okay, this is an estimation until 2028. So as you can see in the slide, here we have a representation of different areas of medical device development. On the top of the graphic, you will see those areas for which a higher market size is foreseen. And on the right area of the diagram, you will see those areas for which a higher growth is expected in these years, in these coming years. So as you can say, the biggest market is foreseen for in vitro diagnosis medical devices, whereas the highest the growth rate would be for general and plastic surgery. Medical device regulation is a really complex scenario during which you may have to face different difficulties, okay? But no panic, okay? Because here we are regulated to help you and also to try to make your development coming into a real product that can be marketed, but the most important thing, to a real product that is safe and that is efficient and perform as intended by you as manufacturers, okay? So the particularities of the medtech market is this bullet point that you can see in the slide. It's a highly regulated market. As the case of medicinal product, we cannot sell medical devices in every sales channel. There are specific channels for doing this activity. Also, depending on the risk classification of our medical device, we will be reviewing later, we may need a authorization by a notified body before we can start marketing our product. Also, there has been a recent change in the legal framework applicable for medical devices in Europe. We will see this briefly in a slide because this change came into, let's say, reality a few years ago. So the situation now is that we have only one legal framework applicable for medical devices. Prescription is not free. Also, there is a constant change, not only in the regulation, but also in the state of the art in general, okay? So this means that you as manufacturers and developers, we will have to constantly updating and reviewing the state of the art applicable or relevant for your products to ensure that they follow the latest safety standards and performance standards. We are talking about products intended for a population that are patients, meaning that they have many health conditions. So these are really high-risk products. And also for demonstrating this safety and performance, we will need to conduct several preclinical and clinical studies. So we need a really high investment before we actually reach our CE mark and we can reach finally the market. And finally, also there is a specific ethical code, okay, for medical devices if we want to do a clinical investigation and conduct a clinical trial, we will have to be approved by committees, ethical committees that have really similarities with those committees that are actually used for also studies, clinical studies with medicinal products. Okay, so this is also under our ethical code, Helsinki Declaration regulation. So here you have a scheme of how could be the typical flow chart, okay, of moving from an idea until an actual reality, an actual product that we can product in an industrial way and commercialize. So maybe we come to a product concept, okay, and after several several intents, we may have different prototypes, okay? And after doing our internal testing, verification, and validation activities, we finally decide to carry on only with one of these prototypes, that we will be further validating and further characterizing until we reach to our final product, okay? Once we have our final product, let's say, foreseen and conceptualized, we will start with the scale-up procedures until we reach to an industrial production, okay? So that will be the typical flow chart coming from an idea to a final product that is commercialized in an industrial way. So when does regulations come into play? Well, actually, we should have regulation in mind since the really beginning, okay? Since we have a product concept, maybe we don't have nothing physical or nothing tangible. We really need to start thinking about regulations because the documentation of all the design and development process need to follow and need to stick to regulatory standards. So it's really important that we do this task from the beginning. Otherwise, you will find a situation where you will have to do retrospective design activities to ensure that the whole design process that you have already conducted fulfills the expectation of the regulations. Here you have a summary description of which will be the main milestone until we reach the CE mark. So first of all, we need to confirm that our invention, that our product is actually qualified as a medical device. It's actually a product regulated by these legal frameworks in Europe. Once we have to do this qualification, we need to assess which is the applicable classification rule and risk classification to our devices, okay? Because that will determine the level of evidence that we need to compile for our product to be finally approved. Next, we need to review among all the applicable or the tentatively applicable regulatory requirements, which one are the actually relevant for our product and demonstrate how we have fulfilled and comply with these specific requirements. And finally, we need to conduct all our developmental activities, meaning, for example, studies in the preclinical scenario, animal studies, in vitro studies, and also all the clinical investigations, okay, clinical studies that we need to support the safety and performance of our devices and to submit this dossier to a specific notified bodies. Now, once we have submitted our dossier to a notified body and they have reviewed and successfully reviewed the product, we may obtain the CE mark. Okay, so from this time onwards, we can start with the commercialization of our product, as I said, in the whole European economic area. Okay, but this doesn't mean that let's say our task as developer or manufacturer have ended here, but we need to continue with regulatory affairs during the whole life cycle of our device. So for this, we need to conduct several post-market regulatory activities that are aimed at reviewing the behavior, let's say, of our product in the market and to trace any incident that we may notice from our device once they are used in an actual intended environment. So let's start with the first point, product qualification, okay? So I have written this example of the ancient paradigm this is a kind of joke, okay? So imagine two products, in this case, two armchairs that are physically the same, okay? As you can see here, they share all the same design features and also the same physical features. So is this technology a medical device or in vitro diagnosis medical device? Well, that's depend, okay? We may have the same product to be regulated as a medical device. Therefore, we need to issue a CE mark for this specific product. Or we may have the same product, but without being considered a medical device for which we would need to issue a CE mark. So what's the difference between this armchair and this other armchair? The intended purpose, okay? Whenever we have a medical intended purpose and our mode of action is based on a physical means, we will have a medical device. So for this case, the specific case, we may have this first armchair that is just intended for comfort, okay? So this comfort intended action is not considered of a medical purpose, so this could be considered as a consumer product. Whereas we may have this other armchair that is intended specific, for example, for people suffering for an traumatologic condition, okay, in order to help them to mitigate pain and to help them to get over as soon as possible. So whenever we claim this intended action that are of a medical nature, we will have a medical device, and this product will have to follow all the requirements according to the medical device regulations in Europe. So once we have determined that our product is actually a medical device, we need to decide whether it is actual medical device itself or an in vitro diagnosis medical device. So for this, we need to consider that we have actually two different legal frameworks given by two different regulations, okay? On the one side, we have this medical device regulation, Regulation 2017-745, which is applicable to medical devices that are intended for being used in vivo, okay? We will see the definition afterwards. Whereas we have this other applicable legal framework, which is the Regulation 2017-745, applicable specific for in vitro diagnosis medical devices, that in this case is only applicable for devices, as its name says, that are working based on an in vitro sample, okay, on an in vitro input data, and as an output, they provide a diagnostic data. So for this specific product, we will have this specific regulation, the IVDR. As I said before, here you have an image of how was the situation according to the previous legal framework of medical devices given by medical devices directives, and how is the situation now given by those two regulations that I have just explained. So the key message here is that the medical device regulation is applicable as of May 2021, whereas the in vitro diagnosis medical device regulation is applicable as of May 2022. This means that any product that has been developed after those dates need to automatically follow the requirements given by these specific regulations. Okay, once we have our qualification already made, meaning that we have confined that the applicable legal framework is any of these two regulations, we need to decide actually which is our kind of device, okay? As you can see here, there are a lot of type of devices, either in the medical device regulation scope or in the in vitro diagnosis medical device regulation scope. Depending on the specific kind of device, we may have differences, for example, in terms of how do we demonstrate the safety, okay, because it's not the same those devices that are invasive or surgically invasive, that, for example, a software where we don't have any physical contact between the device and the intended user, okay? Also, the differences between the different kinds of devices will have a consequence in the way we demonstrate the performance, okay, the effectiveness of these devices. So deciding which type of devices is a worst case it's really important also when conducting the medical device qualification. Here you have the definition, okay, provided by the legal framework specifically. So starting from the medical device regulation, the MDR, regulation 2017-745, here you have the definition, okay? So typically I like to distinguish two parts within this definition. This first part, which is basically defining that medical devices could be any of those different products that you see in this slide: software, implants, materials, apparatus, instrument, alone, etc., intended for being used only in human, okay? And product intended to be used in animals, for example, won't be in the scope of the medical device regulation, and which have broadly a medical purpose, okay? Here the definition have different example of different medical intended purposes, but all in all, this first part of the definition is basically including the different typology of devices, the restriction of being used only in humans, and also the fact that the intended purpose needs to be of a medical nature. Up to here, we will have a definition, or we may find the definition really similar to the definition we have, for example, for a medicinal product, okay? So the difference comes with the second part of the definition. Here, the medical device definition established that the principal intended action cannot be based on a pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic link, okay? So this is the key difference with the medicinal product regulatory category. A medical device needs to have a primary mode of action, which is based on a physical or mechanical means. In case we have a principal mode of action that is based on a pharmacological, immunological, or metabolic mean, we will be talking about a medicinal product, not a medical device, okay? So this is the main, the second part is the actual part really distinguishing between the medical device and the medicinal product regulatory categories. We will see afterwards that in some cases, this is not so clear, okay? And we may find what we call borderline products, okay? Which are products that could be somehow in between the medicinal product and the medical device regulatory categories, okay? So for this product, mechanistic studies really describing the mode of action of the product are really important to finally decide whether we will be sticking to the legal framework applicable for medical devices or the one applicable for medicinal products. Here you have the exclusion of the scope of the medical device regulation. So obviously the medical device regulation, the first one I mentioned, it's not applicable to in vitro diagnosis because they have their own regulation. Also, this regulation is not applicable for medicinal products, advanced therapeutic medicinal products, which have a viable material coming from blood or human. Also, cosmetics products, transplants, tissue or cell animal origin. In case we have any of these derivatives, we need to ensure that they are not viable, okay? Also, the medical device regulation is not applicable to transplant tissues or cells of human origin. And also the medical device regulation is not applicable for substances or products, including biological material, which are viable or with viable organisms. So for example, this is a difference between this new regulation and the previous regulation. We cannot have prebiotics, okay, in a medical device because they include viable organisms. Finally, the medical device regulation is also excluding in its scope those products that are considered to be food, okay, because they have their specific legal framework in Europe as well. So that will be for medical devices, and here you have the definition specific for in vitro diagnosis medical devices. Okay, remember these have their own legal framework, regulation 2017-746 in this case, the IVDR. So here again, in the first part of the definition, we have the different typology of product that can be considered an in vitro diagnosis medical device, or how we call it an IVD. Okay, so an IVD may be an agent, calibrator, instrument, software, and a really long, etc. That are that are sharing that they have that are intended for being used in vitro, okay? With any of these following intended purpose, providing information regarding the physiological or pathological state, regarding physiological or mental impairment, disposition to a condition or disease, to determine the safety or compatibility with potential recipient, for example, when doing transplantation, okay, those in vitro tests that are used for checking the compatibility between two people, to predict treatment response or reactions, okay. These are really, I mean, this is a type of IVD that is increasing more and more, specifically with the arrival of personalized and precision medicine, because now we are developing medicinal products that could be not could be not efficient for people not having a specific mutation, for example, no? So those tests for assessing whether our patient have the therapeutic target for our specific medicinal product are also considered an in vitro diagnosis medical device, or maybe to define or monitoring therapeutic measures, okay? So for example, all the follow-on measures that we do to patients when they are under a specific treatment, for example, reviewing the different blood parameter, biochemical parameters, those will be also considered in vitro diagnosis products. And outside the scope of the medical device, in vitro diagnosis medical device regulation, we will have those products that are for general laboratory use, meaning that they are not linked to a specific diagnosis intended purpose, or maybe those products that are intended for research use only, okay? Here, there is a lot of controversy because we find that many times research use only products are used, in fact, for in vitro diagnosis purposes, okay? So this is something that is not well done. I mean, this is not a good practice because those products for research use only are not designed and are not approved for being used for a diagnosis purpose. Also, invasive implant products are not considered to be under the scope of the in vitro diagnosis medical device regulation. International certified reference material, for example, for doing calibration, outside the scope as well. And finally, material used for external quality assessment scheme, which are really similar to the previous one, are also outside of the in vitro diagnosis medical device regulation scope. Here you have the case of borderline product I commented before. Between the medical device regulatory category and other regulatory categories, we may find different products, okay, which intended purposes or primary mode of action could be sometimes confusing. So for this, it is really recommendable that in case you have doubts on the applicable legal framework, the applicable regulatory category of your product, you contact to your competent authorities, okay? For example, in the case of Spain, to the Spanish competent authority, the AIMS, because typically competent authorities have national procedure to doing this qualification analysis, this regulatory evaluation, to determine which should be the applicable legal framework. In addition to this, the European Commission has published different guidances that are really practical. They include different examples of borderline products, and they explain they have a description of this product and also their intended purposes, and they include which was the final assessment result conducted by the competent authorities, okay? So it's really useful to consult these two guidances, because if you find a similar example to your product, you may benefit for the same qualification rationale that the one you can see in those guidances. Here is, these are the two manual on borderline product that we have. And also, I wanted to, talking about qualification of medical devices, I wanted to make a specific focus on software, okay? Because as you know, software may be also regulated as medical devices or in vitro diagnosis medical devices. So it's sometimes a bit tricky to do this qualification assessment and distinguish between softwares that are maybe just for data collection and that are not having a medical intended purpose, and also distinguish them from a medical device. Okay, so in order for a software to be considered as a medical device or an in vitro diagnosis medical device, we need to reach these three principles. Okay, first of all, we need to have a medical intended purpose. Any of those intended purposes that you can see that we have just reviewed in the definition provided by the regulation. Also, the operational mode or the action exerted by the software should be different from any of these four: simple storage, archival, communication, or simple search. Okay, and the processing conducted by the software need to be of a higher complexity than these four actions, and the processing between the inputs and the output should be different from these four in order to be considered our product a medical device. So, for example, a product intended just for a software intended just for visualizing medical imaging, or a software intended just for storing clinical data from the clinical records won't be regulated under the medical devices regulations. And also, one of the third principle that we need to follow in order to qualify our product as a medical device is that we need to, or the output of our product need to have a benefit for an individual patient. Okay, this means that our final output cannot be, for example, general well-being recommendations. Okay, that are theoretically applicable to the whole population, but they need to be specific, adapted, and intended for a specific clinical benefit of specific patients. Okay. So once we have checked that we are complying with these three principles, we are sure that we have a medical device, but we need to decide either if the applicable legal framework is the MDR or the IVDR. Okay. So basically, this is done by exclusion. Okay. In case that the scope of our or the product is outside the scope of the medical device regulation, we directly go to the IVDR, and also depending on the nature of the input data. Okay, in case we have a software, for example, whose input data are coming from an in vitro diagnosis source, for example, a PCR or for example, DNA extraction for doing afterward some processing on the DNA. This will be also considered to be under the IVDR, okay, because the input data is coming from an IVD, so the software is considered also to be an IVD. So that will be regarding qualification, okay? So the next point we need to assess is the classification. This means which is the actual risk class applicable to our device. So for medical devices and for in vitro, we have in both cases for risk classification, going from 1 or A until 3 or D, okay, lower to higher. And well, how do we decide which is the actual risk class of our product? We need to apply specific classification rules, okay? So in the case of the medical device regulation, the MDR, we have a total of 22 classification rules that are applicable depending on the intended purpose of our device, okay? So here you have the different, let's say, groups of classification rules that we have. We have rules applicable to those products that are non-invasive. Then we have rules applicable to products that are invasive. Rules for active medical devices, meaning that need external support energy for working. For example, those that need an electrical supply. And then a special rules that are specific for products with given features, such as product made of nanomaterials or product intended, for example, for administration of medicinal product by the respiratory route. Okay, so these rules are included in the Annex 8 of the Medical Device Regulation, So by applying this rule, you will finally reach the actual risk classification to your device. As an implementation criteria, we need to bear in mind that in case that different rules are applicable to our product, we always need to stick to the strictest rule, meaning that if we have two different rules, we need to follow the one that is classifying our product in a higher risk classification. Moving to in vitro diagnosis medical devices, in this case, the IVDR has its own classification rule as well. They are laid down also in Annex 8 of the IVDR. And in this case, the same is applicable as for medical devices. The application of each of the rules is depending highly on the intended purpose of our product. And in case that different rules are applicable to our device, the one including our product in a higher risk class is the one that we need to choose on to follow. Okay. Basically, in this case for IVD, the idea is to classify in a higher risk classification those products that have tentatively a higher public health risk, or those products that represent a higher personal health risk. Okay, so that will be, let's say, the rationale follow for moving between class A and class B. So here you have all the obligation that you need to follow as manufacturers. Okay, so we won't stop in this slide because it's really theoretic, and we will continue with the obligation, but let's say explain from a regulatory roadmap overview. Okay, so basically the obligation specific for medical device manufacturer are aimed at ensuring that the products are complying with their applicable regulatory requirements, safety and performance, not only at the end, at the point of the CE mark, but also during the whole life cycle of the product. And also that any incident or issue regarding to the use of our product is treated and is managed accordingly to the market surveillance strategy that we define as manufacturer. So how we reach the CE mark? Okay, so once we have confined that the applicable regulatory category is the one of medical devices, and we have reviewed the classification as well, we need to compile a technical documentation, and we need to build up a quality management system, okay? The technical documentation is the part where we will be describing all the specification, description, risk assessment, all the information that we will be sharing with the device, all the preclinical studies, clinical studies, verification and validation activities, all this information regarding specific to the product that we want to see in mark will be summarized in the technical documentation. And then we have also, as a second pillar of the approval of our device, the quality management system. In this case, it's not applicable specifically to a given product, as the case of the technical documentation, but it is specifically to our company, to the manufacturer company, okay? So both pillars need to be assessed by a notified body, and in case they are accepted by the notified body, we then may obtain the CE mark to our product. Okay, so depending on the risk classification, we may need additional procedures in order to our product to be CE marked. Okay, so for example, in case that our product includes ancillary medicinal substances, substances of animal or human origin, products that are based on substances, meaning medical devices that are formulations, or the case of companion in vitro diagnosis that were those that I explained before for therapy selection. For these cases, in addition to a notified body assessment, we will have to conduct or receive an assessment by a competent authority. And for specific complex devices, such as active implantable medical devices or devices for in vitro diagnosis of the highest risk class, class D, we will need to obtain also the approval, not only from the notified body, but also from an expert panel and EU reference laboratories, okay? So one of the key points of the compiling the technical documentation is the identification of the actual requirements that are applicable to our specific product, okay? Bear in mind that the medical device regulation is a really general regulatory framework, meaning that it's applicable for all type of devices, from a software to a formulation, going in between in an implantable device, okay? So the list of requirements that is included in the medical device regulation is really broad, and we need to review among them which is the actual applicable for our specific product. If not, if we think that a requirement is not applicable for our device, we need to provide a justification of this non-applicability, okay? So for example, there are specific requirements to devices that are provided in an sterile status, okay? So in case our medical device is not sterile, we need to justify that this requirement is not applicable because of this fact, because basically that our device is not intended to be sterilized, okay? Um, those requirements are referred to as general safety and performance requirements. They are included in Annex 1 of the Medical Device Regulation and the In vitro diagnosis medical device regulation, and they are divided in 3 chapters, okay? The first chapter are really general and are applicable to all type of devices, but the one that I told you before that you need to really assess whether are applicable to your case or not are the one regarding the design and the manufacturing of your device, okay? Because that really depends on the kind of device you are developing. And finally, in chapter 3, you have all the requirements regarding to the instruction for use and the labeling that you will have to provide to get it to your device so that the intended users can consult them and use your device properly. So how we demonstrate compliance with those requirements that we saw that are applicable to our case? Well, typically, we need to stick to regulatory guidances, and in the case of the medtech industry, it is really recognized the use of international standards, okay? So here you have different groups or entities that are providing these guidances, regulatory guidances or standards. So I really recommend you to review all the guidances or standards published by these groups once you have identified the requirements that are applicable to your specific products. So this will be a final representation of the regulatory roadmap. Okay, so we are now finishing defining I mean, we have just confined that our product is a medical device and we have made the classification. So we need now to proceed with this regulatory roadmap until we reach the final CE mark. Okay, so here I have highlighted some of the key milestones, and we will be reviewing these milestones now. Because they have some particularities specifically for products that are intended for a pediatric population, okay? So starting from the first, the definition of the intended purpose, okay? So this is a really important milestone in our whole regulatory roadmap because it will determine the rest of the developmental activities that we need to conduct to our product to be CE mark, okay? An intended purpose is a really broad concept, okay? Typically, it is really recommended to provide or to define the intended purpose in a structured way. This means in a tabular format, including these fields that you can see in the slide. So in the intended purpose, we need to define the exact medical condition that we will be addressing with our product, the name of the disease and or the condition that we will be treating or managing. Also, the intended population, adults, in this case, children, infants, or others. We will review this afterwards because here we don't have a clear definition of what will we actually consider a children or an infant in accordance with the medical device regulation. Also, the intended user that may be different from the patient population. For example, in case that the device is not used, is not applied by the same patients. Okay, those parts of the human body that are contacting, if any, uh, uh, with the device. Then the duration of the contact, the repeated application in case they are needed, the type of contact the device is having with the mucosal membranes, of the degree of invasiveness or implantation of our device, or if applicable, any contraindication or precaution that we need to consider when using our product, and also defining the fact that if our product is intended for single use, so it can be reusable, okay? So this could be the minimum fields that we need to define when defining our intended purpose for our product. So as you can see, it's really a softening term that we need to reflect in our technical documentation. As I said before, in terms of the medical device regulation, the medical device legal framework in Europe, we don't have a clear definition for what we consider a pediatric population, okay? So here, the medtech industry is typically following the guidances that we follow for other regulatory categories, in this case for medicinal products, for example. So here you can see that in Europe, the recognized different type of pediatric population as this you can see in the slide. Neonates that will be patients going between 1 day and 27 days of age. Then we have infants that will be between 28 days until 23 months. Children between 2 years and 11 years, and adolescents that will be between 12 years and less than 18 years, okay? Here I have brought also the definition of the different subgroups within pediatric population provided by the FDA, okay, in the USA market. So as you can see, they are roughly the same, except with the adolescent population, okay? So this is something that you need to bear in mind in case that you want to define a regulatory strategy covering both territories, okay? That in some cases, what you define as adolescent subgroup won't be the same in Europe or in the USA. The next step we need to really address in our technical documentation is the clinical benefits, okay? We need to define also in our intended purpose, which will be the specific benefit of our device or how our device will be impacting the health of the intended population, the intended patients, okay? So here, whenever we talk about any clinical benefit, we need to sustain this clinical benefit in comparison with the state of the art, okay? Meaning that we need to compare this our product with other alternatives that we may have already in the market for the same intended use or intended indication. Another key core of the technical documentation is the risk management, okay? The risk management activities are aimed at identifying any risks that can come from the production, from the design, or from the use of our products in order to assess how severe or how probable these risks are and try to reduce them as far as possible, okay? So for this, we are typically following a methodology that is really recognized. It is described in this ISO standard 14971, and it includes 4 steps, okay? The first step is doing an identification of the hazards, okay? Which includes defining which could be the possible source of hazards, for example, biological contamination, energy hazards, use errors, etc. And also the hazard situation, meaning the sequences of events that needs to be between a hazard and a risk arrive. Okay, so for example, there could be a hazard which is biological contamination, but this hazard won't be a problem in case we have a adequate package. Okay, so the hazard situation would be that we don't have an adequate package, so the hazard of a biological contamination appears, okay? So this will be the hazard identification phase.
Just saying, for sake of time, I don't know if you already want to open a round of questions or you prefer to continue.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. I will just comment a bit more about the risk management, and I think that then we can open the open question. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for the reminder. For the specific case of pediatric population, there are several hazards that we need to take into account depending on the specific pediatric group, okay? So for example, the age or the degree of maturity of the child, the natural history of the clinical condition, because as you know, this may vary during the growth of a children. Also the presence or the comorbidity with other clinical conditions, the lack of extrapolation between some application that we may have already approved in adults to applications into children, and also, as I said, the impact of the development of the children, okay? At the end, the risk benefit, it should be favorable to the side of the benefits. The second step is the risk estimation. Okay, we need to parameterize how we'll be assessing our risk in terms of severity and probability. Okay, this means that we will be giving a punctuation of severity and probability to each of the risks that we have identified and decide if they are acceptable or unacceptable. Once we have defined our different risks as acceptable or unacceptable, we need them to be reduced as far as possible. Not only those unacceptable, but also the acceptable, okay? This is something new with the new regulation. So for this, we need to propose and define mitigating measures. This mitigating measure could be a change of the design that will be the most powerful mitigating measure, or maybe this mitigating measure could be, for example, including a warning or a disclaimer within the instruction for use so that our intended users are aware of these potential risks and we avoid them as far as possible. At the end, as I said before, the idea is that we move all of our risks to a safe area and we have reduced them as far as possible. And as I said before as well, this risk management activity is something that it is also let's say, continued after our device had reached the market, because the feedback from the post-market phase is really important also for the risk management activities. And finally, I wanted just to review the clinical evidence part, because this is also really relevant for the case of pediatric population. Here you have, for your consideration, I will be sharing the presentation afterwards, some of the key terminology that you need to bear in mind when talking about clinical validation of medical devices. But basically, our idea is that for clinical validation, we need to conduct a really exhaustive and systematic approach, which include all these phases that you can see in the slide, okay? First of all, doing a scoping, meaning that a description of our device and all the claims that we want to support by clinical evidence. Then in stage 1, we need to do identification of the data that we'll be using for clinical validation. This data could be data from a clinical trial with our specific product, or maybe data from clinical trial with products that we see that are similar to our case. Okay, so this is something that you need to define at this stage. Then in the appraisal, you do a prioritization on the different clinical data, basically depending on their impact on our product. In stage 3, you define and you do this analysis, basically comparing all the clinical data you have with the safety and the performance that you want to support for your device, okay? So it's in this stage 3 where you decide either if you have sufficient clinical evidence or not. And finally, you complete or you document all these 3 stages in a report. Okay, in the case of performance evaluation, which is applicable for in vitro diagnosis, the approach is roughly the same, but in this case, we also need to provide evidences about the association between the analyte and the clinical condition that we want to diagnose. This is called scientific validation. And also analytical performance. This means the sensitivity and the specificity of our test, because we want to be sure that our results are not false positives or true or false negatives, okay? In the case of pediatric population, general principle, okay, applicable for clinical validation, you need to also take in mind specific characteristics of the pediatric population, okay? That in most of the cases, will oblige to us to conduct a specific trial with pediatric population, okay? So here we have, for example, the height, weight, growth and development, disease conditions, hormonological influences, anatomical and physiological differences with the adult population, activity and maturity level, immune status, and along, etc. Okay, these are key differences between the pediatric population and the adult population that in some of cases will prevent us to use as evidence studies, clinical studies that are already there for adult populations. Okay. So for these cases, you will need to conduct specific clinical trials with pediatric patients. Here you have some examples, okay, when you can demonstrate that the clinical evidences that you already have are enough to support the use of your device in a pediatric population, okay? So for example, whenever you can define that there is no impact on their safety or the performance of your device between an adult or an pediatric population, you can still rely on your data coming from an adult population to use your device also in a pediatric population. So I will leave here for your consultation. And finally, I just wanted to mention the orphan medical device designation. Okay, this is something really interesting for you because in most of the cases, pediatric or medical devices in the pediatric population are also orphan medical devices. Okay, so for these cases, although we don't have a specific priority regulatory pathway, notified bodies are aware of this situation and they accept really limited clinical data for product to be approved, okay? So for these cases, it's really important to define whether our products are considered orphan medical device, because in that case, you can rely on a limited pre-market clinical evaluation to reach your CE mark and then complete the rest of the clinical evaluation that you need to comply for your device with observational study, okay, with real world evidence data. That will be the case of for market clinical follow-up studies. And finally, this is the last slide. For the case of orphan medical devices, I would really recommend you to review this program of the European Commission that is aimed of providing support for the definition of clinical strategy of these orphan medical devices, okay? So as I said before, in most of the cases, pediatric medical devices are also considered orphan. So it could be really interesting to consult this panel of experts to decide which will be the minimal clinical strategy to fulfill the regulators' expectations so that we reach the CE mark as far as possible. Okay. So that will be all, Charlotte. Thank you very much for your patience. And now, yes, I will be more than happy to review any questions that you may have. We have exceeded a bit the time, but please feel free to do any comment that you have. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Francisco. In the chat, we had one question, so maybe we can start with this one.
Okay.
Saying, where do we see the difference in the process when comparing adult versus the application to adult versus children? And are there different approaches depending on the pediatric age group targeted? If so, where?
Okay. So here, in terms of regulatory procedure, there are no differences, okay? So in the case of Europe, okay? So this means that you will have to follow the same regulatory pathway, regardless that you are developing a product intended for an adult population or for a pediatric population. The difference here would be that the level of detail of the clinical data that you need to compile will be more restricted for the case of adult population, and there will be more flexibility in the case of children population, okay? Because it's acknowledged that it's very difficult to conduct clinical trials with children, and that clinical data is really reduced for this specific population. And regarding the second question, well, there are differences that you need to address, but this is something that is done case by case, meaning that if you have a product that is intended for a specific pediatric group, you need to compile of all the evidence for that specific pediatric group. Whereas if you have a product intended for different groups, you will have to include in your clinical evaluation patients from all these different groups, okay, in order to review that you are following you are fulfilling the requirements for all these groups you are claiming that the product can be used. I hope I have answered the question.
Great, thank you. From my side, yes, I don't know if
Okay.
the person who asked this has the full answer. If not, is there any other questions that you would like to ask?
If not, you have my contact details within the presentation, so feel free to reach me out if you have any question once you revise the material.
So just 5 seconds if someone wants to jump in. No one? Well, just to finish, so first of all, really thank you, Francisco, for this presentation. It has been really interesting and really give a big overview on the all steps that need to be realized for medical devices. As you said, it's a complex scenario, but I think you give a lot of key in hands to overcome the barriers that can seem regulatory in general. So a big thank you for you.
Thank you.
And also thank you for all the attendees that were here today. We will have our next training capsule that will be on the 16th of October, because I remember that we will have the Pediatric Innovation Day with a lot of topics about pediatric in Riga. And it will be about pediatric patient experience. So if you are interested, please block the date for this training. And yeah, don't hesitate to follow us on LinkedIn, where we have all our news. You have here the link, and we can send it right now to the chat. And that being said, we can send you Francisco contact if you want to contact him particularly, as he mentioned. And yeah, thank you to everyone. Wish you a really nice afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.